my best efforts to do so in the earlier part of that 10-day window, they both declared themselves satisfied with the proposed schedule. It would be hard to exaggerate the sheer unending pressure of the last few days before the expedition began. The days passed in a blur, and the nights were short and restless. Early on the morning of my proposed departure date, 13th of March, Troy dropped by our base to report that poor weather over Ward Hunt Island and the midway refuelling point at the Eureka High Arctic Weather Station would prevent us from flying that day. The next morning, Friday 14th of March, Bill Galletz phoned to confirm that weather conditions at Eureka and Ward Hunt Island were now satisfactory, and we were go to depart. Accompanied by Ian Wesley, my base manager, Martin Hartley, our photographer, and Jeannie Dougherty, an English journalist, I boarded the aircraft, one of Ken Borwick's fleet of de Havilland DHC-6 Twin Otters, the workhorses of the North. We took off at 7:30 in the morning and flew due north for almost 3 hours, the landscape far beneath us growing ever more barren and threadbare, as grey and apparently lifeless as a desert. I spent the first part of the flight deep in conversation with Ian about my mileage plan. The first part of the plan was merely a psychological trick. To break the 416 nautical mile distance, 1 nautical mile is equivalent to 1.151 statute miles, or 1.852 kilometres, into manageable portions, of time as well as distance. I knew that 60 days travelling should pretty much crack it, so like the minutes of a clock face, I split the journey down into multiples of 5 days. My plan was to average 3 nautical miles a day over the first 20 days, the hardest in terms of ice and weather conditions, and made even more gruelling because the sledge would then be at its heaviest. I would be travelling for no more than 5 or 6 hours a day in the early stages, reflecting the exhausting battle to drag the sledge over probably the hardest terrain, inverted commas, and the lowest temperatures that I would encounter. But as the weather and ice conditions improved and the sledge grew lighter, I was aiming to progressively increase the pace and the hours travelled to cover up to 10 nautical miles a day, before the final push to the pole in the perpetual daylight of the polar summer, when I would be travelling for 15 hours or more every day. I gazed down at the familiar landscape as we flew north. It is undulating country at first, thickly blanketed with snow, but further north the landscape becomes much more dramatic. Pyramidal peaks and frost-shattered screes, huge glaciated valleys and densely crevassed glaciers, with broad tongues of vivid azure blue ice spilling into the frozen sea. Some people talk about the Arctic as a monotonous wilderness of white, but if you open your eyes and really look at the landscape, especially at this time of year, you realize that there are no whites whatsoever to be seen. Everything is in shades and tones of pastel colors, and only in the stark, bright light at the height of the polar summer, when the sun is high in the sky, do you begin to see true whites among the other colors. By now the snow-covered hills of Cornwallis and Devon Island had given way to the featureless sea ice of Norwegian Bay, and then we began the spectacular run up Eureka Sound, before landing to refuel at Canada's northernmost civilian outpost, at 79 degrees 59 minutes north on the west coast of Ellesmere Island, 601 nautical miles from the pole. We stayed no more than half an hour, then climbed back aboard for the final leg toward Hunt Island, a further 185 miles to the north. Although Ginny kept chatting to me all the way, I was lost in my own thoughts, and replied only in monosyllables, if at all. For the next 10 weeks, I had to put the normal concerns and preoccupations behind me. I was focusing only on the journey ahead, and the ultimate goal that lay beyond the ice. Progress north was the only criteria, and after all the months of preparation, and the help and support of countless individuals and organizations, it was now down to me alone. We flew on. The scene beneath was of a land at the frontier of the habitable earth, stripped to its bare elements, rock, snow, and ice. And beyond even that lay the Arctic Ocean. In summer, its dark waters are littered with ice floes pocked with aquamarine pools of meltwater. In winter, it is bound in the rigid, unyielding embrace of the polar ice cap. Some visitors find the raw elemental quality of the high Arctic landscape disturbing, and even frightening. I love it for precisely those reasons. It is desolate country, of course, but with its own subtle and haunting beauty. I had stopped even pretending to listen to the conversation now. I was deep within myself. Despite the unimaginable commitment and costs of getting to this point, I could not have claimed to be excited by what lay ahead. Instead, I was filled with dread. This was my third attempt. I had to succeed this time. It took an hour and a quarter to reach our destination. Ward Hunt Island, 3 miles off the northern shore of Ellesmere Island, at roughly 83 degrees and 5 minutes north, is no more than a couple of miles long and a mile or so wide. It is dominated by Walker Hill, a conical peak like an extinct volcano, rising 1,360 feet from the frozen sea, with a narrow apron of ice-covered rock to the east, enclosing a shallow frozen lake. The island marks the frontier between two worlds. From the summit of Walker Hill, you can look south towards a vast landmass, extending for 10,000 miles, populated by billions of creatures, and encompassing mountains and plains, tundra, grasslands and forests, rivers, lakes and deserts, villages, towns and great cities. To the north lies no land at all, only ice and black, frigid water. A tiny handful of creatures eke out an existence at the margins, but in the frozen heart of the ice cap there is nothing but ice, snow, wind, and water. My own relationship with the Arctic has evolved over 15 years. Initially, I was fearful of it, but as I grew more competent in the day-to-day strategies and skills of surviving and travelling, I gradually let down my guard and found myself drawn to its rarefied presence. There are times, alone on the ice towards the end of a long sledging day, when I feel wholly in tune with this world, moving over the ice without conscious thought or action. Those are the moments that inform, long after they have passed. Much as I love my family and my home among the beautiful moors and tors of Dartmoor in England, I know that the Arctic will always exert a powerful pull on me. I'm there by choice, not compulsion, and I tolerate the cold, the dangers, and the back-breaking effort as a fair price to be paid for the privilege of experiencing life on the frozen ocean, and seeing sights that no other human has ever seen, or ever will. For one of the wonders of the polar ice cap is that it is ever the same, but always different. It exists not as an immovable mass of solid ice, but in a state of constant flux, as the perpetual motion, compression, and distortion of the ice opens up fresh leads or crumples the ice cap like paper. Sometimes imperceptibly, sometimes dramatically, the whole sweep of the frozen landscape changes from hour to hour and day to day. Two people could set off for the pole on the same day, but even if they travelled no more than 3 miles apart, each could have a completely different experience. One could get fog, while the other was in bright sunshine, or huge drifts of snow, while the other crossed clear ice. My route from Ward Hunt Island lay due north to the North Geographic Pole, lying near the heart of the Arctic Ocean, and I would be using a chart rather than a map for navigation because this was an ocean voyage, not an overland journey. My sledge was my vessel, and I was its captain, subject to the same forces, winds, tides, and currents, that a yachtsman would face. But there was one crucial difference. In a boat, you can sit motionless and still travel in the direction you want to go. On an expedition, except on the rare occasions when lucky enough to pick up a few miles of northward ice drift, every metre of the distance to the pole had to be won by the sweat of my brow. There were certain givens. On a straight-line course bearing true north from Ward Hunt Island to the pole, I knew that, to a greater or lesser extent, I would be encountering open water, rubble fields, and pressure ridges of ice, flat ice pans and floes, and areas of recently refrozen water. I would never be more than 12 metres above sea level, nor, despite an ocean depth of 4,000 metres at the pole, more than a metre below it. Any more, and I would not be coming back.